Memories of my mother, Isabella Penman. Just days after learning of her bleak prognosis, my mother started to do what she had done all of her life. She was determined to prove the doctors wrong and live way longer than they projected. She put all of her affairs in order with all the legal and sundry things, and then she turned to planning for a joyous and dignified passing. Over her lifetime, Mom taught us all a great deal of very important lessons. One of my earliest recollections is the importance of grace under fire. We were full of excitement. We're crossing the Atlantic for the first time in a brand new Air Canada DC-8. Mark was 1 and I was 6, and we were going to join my father in Canada. As the journey came to an end, and it felt like a long time, I remember asking my mom, "Why is there smoke coming out of the plane's engines?" Mom, in her typical unflappable manner, told me no need to worry, go back to sleep. After an emergency landing and clearing immigration and customs in Gander, Newfoundland, we traveled on with another plane to meet my father. Canada would never be the same. Isa had arrived. The importance of planning and preparation for all eventualities was highlighted in the mid-70s on a family vacation at the Lazy Bee Beachfront Resort in South Carolina. For those who need clarification, yes, my mother was ahead of her time and had invented glamping. On a rainy morning, the Penman family awoke to find the pop-up trailer was the only thing standing in a sea of water all around. A tropical storm had rolled in overnight and was gaining to hurricane strength. This had all the hallmarks of being a precursor of the many other sea cruises my mom and dad have taken. Quick thinking on my mom's part prevented the cruise. Team Penman had the pop-up trailer packed and hitched to the car for a quick getaway in under 5 minutes. Those of you that are aware of my mother's passion for packing in anticipation of travel, no doubt will be dismayed at the 5-minute time frame. I will, however, as one who can bear witness to the event, make 2 small caveats. First, the kettle took way longer to boil than it should have. My mom had to have her tea before she went to do anything. And second of all, we had to unpack and repack the pop-up trailer in order to let my brother Mark out. He was inside the first time we closed it up. Perhaps the most important lesson my mother taught me was in the last 6 months of her life, and that's always to put family first. Not long after her diagnosis, my mother told me she didn't want a fuss made at a funeral, but instead wanted a service of celebration of her life. In typical mom fashion, she started to make lists of details to ease the burden on all of us around her. My mom did not want her mind to be affected by pain medication for prolonged periods at the end of her life. The Lord granted her this wish, as up to 3 days prior to her passing to glory, Mom could review her lists and be most insistent to me that I make sure my father uses Dettol to clean the filters in the humidifier. Now, bidding adieu to my mother, I take the words of Ruth Ann Mahaffey. I want to thank you, Mother, for teaching me so well. And though the time has come, I must bid you farewell. I remember all you've taught me, and make you proud you'll see. Thank you, my dear Mother, for all the love you've shown me. Although you've left this earth, and now you've taken flight, I know that you are here with me each morning, noon, and night.
When I think of my mom, I think of the Scottish emblem, the thistle. It has a beautiful purple head. It has a long, thick stem, prickly leaves that are full of nettles, and a very strong set of roots that are hard to weed out. My mom was a person of faith, and she was saved at a very young age. Her favorite verse was Romans 5:8. Yet while we were sinners, Christ died for us. My mom was not a preachy type of person, but practiced her faith through service and showed people God's love and her love for others by what she did. My mom was also fierce and ferocious when it came to defending her family and anybody that would attack them or anything that she thought was right. She was ferocious. The other part of my mom that I really loved very much was my mom was full of fun. She was a fun person. She was very feisty in interpersonal relationships as well. But that was my mom, just like a thistle. My mom was a daughter first, and my grandma came to live with us in Canada. And for 16 years, my mom looked after her. She honored her mother and was a very dutiful daughter. It was a great example to both Stuart and I. When I think of my mom too, she's also a sister. She had two older brothers, John Lennox and Dick Lennox. And she was very proud and very loving towards these two boys. They were her big brothers and she loved them very much. John Lennox, she told me, was witty, smart. He was talented in music. He wrote poems and songs, and she always talked fondly of him. And later in life, my mom made connection to John Lennox, her brother's son, my mom's nephew, and she had kept an open relationship with him. And she loved talking to John, her nephew, because it reminded her so much of her brother. When I think about Dick, my mom always told me how proud she was of Dick. When Dick was in his early 20s, he left for Burma with the British Army, and shortly after arriving in Burma, he was captured by the Japanese and spent most of the war in a Japanese prisoner of war camp. Well, my mom, this is the ferociousness about her, is that she never really forgave the Japanese. And in fact, it was hard to get my mom to go to a Japanese restaurant or anything like that. And when my dad in 1983 bought his first Japanese car, my mom didn't talk to him for 2 weeks, in fact. That's the feistiness of her. My mom also had three younger siblings, two sisters and a brother. And Margaret was the closest in age to my mom. And apparently they fought a lot, the feistiness again in her. I think it had to do with the fact that they were close in age. And according to Harriet and Drew, whenever they started fighting, you had to head for cover because it got really, really rough. But I think it had to do mostly with the fact that Margaret and my mom are big personalities and are very similar. But my mom really did love Margaret. And some of our fondest memories as family is when Margaret immigrated to Canada, was going camping and picnicking and vacationing. I can remember seeing both my Aunt Margaret and my mom in bathing suits in the rain, cooking over Coleman stoves. It was one of the fondest memories I've had. My mom used to also go on cruises with Margaret and Willie, and she really did love Margaret, her children, Daniel and James, and the grandchildren. Then there was my Uncle Drew, who was my mom's youngest brother, and she really was protective of Drew and always told Drew what to do, when to do it, and how to do it. And in fact, right up to the very last, she continued to tell Drew what to do. She loved Maud and Paul and Leslie very much, and once again was very, very fond of them. When it comes to Harriet, my mom was very proud of Harriet because Harriet went into the ministry. And for several years, and most of her life, she has served there, and my mom was very proud of that. My mom also was a good mother to me and Stuart. She showed us examples of how to serve in ministry, and she was very proud that both Stuart and I served at Camp Minneoy. She was proud that Stuart served as in senior staff, and then later in life, when I became a camp director, my mom used to come and help work. My fondest memories of my mom at camp were always with an apron on. At Camp Minneoy when I was a kid, I always saw my mom with an apron and working around the kitchen. When she came to Camp Kikika, she was a grandma, and she brought everything in bags and boxes for the grandkids, but she also brought stuff for all the staff that were with us year-round. She was grandma to everybody. And the first thing my mom would do is when she arrived at camp after giving everything out, is she would go put an apron on. And this one particular time I remember, well, hang a sec, my dad would always head to the dish pit. He liked the dish pit. But my mom would put an apron on, and this one particular time we had a Korean group in. And my mom was out in there washing the tables down with bleach, which she wasn't supposed to do according to Heather. She was supposed to use another cleaning solution, but you couldn't tell my mom anything when she got it. She loved to use bleach. She was out there for about 10-15 minutes, fluttering around, talking to people, chatting. She came back into the kitchen and she said to me, "I think they're really having a hard time with my Scottish accent." And I said, "Not really, Mom. They don't speak English. They just speak Korean." Didn't matter to her. She went right back out the door and away she went. My mom was also a wife to my father and supported my dad in everything he wanted to do. First, she was a military wife. My dad was in the RAF. But then when my dad decided to immigrate to Canada, she stayed in Scotland for 11 months by herself. When the time came for her to come with 2 young boys, she loaded on a plane and came to Canada. And she didn't know anybody. She left her family behind, not knowing that they would all follow her eventually. But coming to Canada, she was very supportive of my dad. When my dad decided to change his career and go back to school and university, my mom just went right out and got a job. She worked for Grand Union as a bookkeeper. My mom was competent and very dependable and responsible, and quickly went to payroll clerk and then eventually to human resources. My mom was very loyal to Steinberg's Miracle Food Mart A&P. When I think about my mom, when it comes to her grandchildren and that, I have a story that I'd like to tell. We were traveling to Scotland. We had been, as a family, it was Heather, myself, my dad, and the 3 kids. And we were traveling down to York. We'd stopped several times. My dad was getting very frustrated with having to stop all the time. But finally, my mom had to go to the bathroom. Now, the thing about my mom is my mom always wanted to lose weight. And this time she finally had lost weight and was still wearing. And the reason she always had problems is she'd go to Weight Watchers, find out she lost 3 pounds, and then send Stuart and I over to get a Carini's pizza to celebrate. So it was hard for her to lose weight. But finally, she was successful and lost weight. She was wearing a pair of stretchy pants she probably shouldn't have, but she wanted to be comfortable. My mom had to go to the bathroom, so we drove into a rest area with a travel center and a restaurant in it. And my dad proceeded to pass all the good spots parked out front and drove down to the very end and parked. Well, my mom was quite annoyed. Now she had to walk all the way back up, past a big, huge window with people sitting and eating, and to go to the washroom. She jumped out and she started to walk, and as she was going, she was really giving my dad a blessing and not concentrating too much on her pants. And the next thing you know, her pants fell down around her ankles. Well, my mom just scooped them back up and proceeded to go to the bathroom. I knew instantly my dad was in big trouble. And on his way back, I could see my mom's face was beet red, and she was ready to give him a blessing. And then when she opened the door and popped her head in, her face was beet red, and she was about to start on my dad when Tara, who was only 5, said, "Grandma, that was really funny." And instantly, my mom's face changed, and she started to laugh. And then she said, "And that's why you always have to wear clean underwear." At that point, Lauren piped in and said, "Yep, Grandma, you always say we need to have clean underwear because you never know." We laughed for at least half an hour and the rest of the day on our way down to York. That was my mom. My mom was fun. She was faithful. She was ferocious. She was feisty. And she was fun. So when I think of my mom, I think of the thistle. My mom was a blessing to us, and I'm glad she's home.
Hi, my name is Megan Brownie, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm the oldest granddaughter of David and Isa Penman, otherwise known to me as Granny and Papa. So I would just like to share with you a few memories I have of my gran, things that I'm going to keep with me always, and things that I'm going to tell my kids about her. So my very first memory of my gran is actually from 30 years ago this week. It's from December 3rd, 1987, and it was actually the day that my younger brother was born, and my grandparents were staying at my house. On this day, my grandmother was probably the most excited person in the whole entire world that she was getting her second grandbaby. And for whatever reason, she had taken me to get my first haircut. She'd taken me shopping. So she had me looking my best, or so she thought. In reality, she'd taken me to get a haircut that was shaped like a bowl and stuffed me into a red velvet dress, which I was not very excited about. But per photographic evidence that my grandfather has, the two of us were actually dressed in matching dresses when we went to see my brother at the hospital for the first time. And I think my gran had quite a fun day that day, wandering around with her great-granddaughter, getting ready to meet the new baby. But the thing that really makes me laugh, and I'll always remember, is actually not from that day, but it was from the night of my brother's birth. And so after we're home and the bowl haircut was digested and the red velvet dress was off, my grandmother decided that we needed to take my very hyper 1-year-old golden lab for a walk. So instead of going to the park behind my house, my grand decided that we were going to go to a conservation area. So being that it was December 3rd and it was pretty cold, she had me in about 14 different layers of clothing, undershirt, t-shirt, long shirt, sweater, jacket, this, that, every single layer of clothing imaginable known to man. And I remember her actually going through the steps and teaching me how you dress for cold weather. So we were prepared. So we get out there and she lets me start walking the dog, which I think is amazing. So we're walking through this park and then the dog starts, he's about 65 pounds at the time. So he had a lot of weight on me and he starts pulling me. And then he starts running and getting faster and faster. And so my grand tries to take the leash and she grabs the leash. And the next thing I remember is just the two of us getting dragged through the mud and then ending up in the lake. Probably looking back, it probably wasn't the funnest moment for Gran, but I do remember that when we got back in the car, the two of us could not stop laughing. And it's something that we've laughed about probably for the last 32 years. It's just a very special memory that we have from bonding together as granddaughter and grandmother. As the years went on, the grandchildren count went from 2 to 5. So this was a very exciting thing for my grandmother. I think she was most at home and most happy and comfortable when her whole family was together and she had all 5 of us under one roof. It didn't happen very often, but when it did, she loved to drive us around in her Nissan van that had the "I love my grandchildren" vanity plates on the back. My dad endlessly teased her about this. She refused to take it down. I remember it was there for so long that it got to the point that I was kind of embarrassed because I was worried that someone I might know would see us driving around in this van. But it would just goes to show just how much my gran loved us, that she wanted the whole world to know how much she loved being a grandma. And it was not, it was something that I'll always take with me, just that love that she shared with us from the very beginning. I remember one summer in particular when Matt and I were staying over at her house with Lauren and Tara and John Mark. And I think it's no secret that John Mark and Matt were her special boys. She loved them very dearly and she put them in a special place. And that doesn't mean that the girls were any different, but Matt and John Mark had a very special spot in her heart. And I think that summer, if I remember correctly, Lauren and Tara and I were fighting, being very catty, being very annoying, and we had overheard my gran on the phone with one of her friends talking about how she didn't quite understand girls and that she didn't know what she was going to do with us. And so Lauren and I took that as my gran saying that she didn't like us. So instead of doing the smart thing and saying, well, let's, behave better so we can win her favor, we decided that we would try to sabotage the boys so they would look bad so that Gran would like us better. I don't know how that fared, but I do know that looking back, we could have not been more wrong, that our grandmother loved each and every one of us so dearly, and that the love that she had for us as girls was no different than the love she had for boys, but she probably was a little mystified with raising girls for the first time, being that she had been a boy mom and raised 2 sons. So girls were a different challenge for her, but I know that when she did get to do the girly things with us, like picking out wedding dresses and planning showers, she loved that kind of stuff too. We quickly got over that phase of life with favorites and whatnot. And I remember that my gran was so excited when I learned how to use a phone. And I remember her teaching me her phone number, and I memorized it. Like, I still remember it to this day. It's pretty much the same. But I remember her telling me to call her anytime, day or night, and that she would be there for me. And she was. And we started out kind of, I call her every week or every 2 weeks, and then eventually that became every day. And my grandma became one of my very best friends. I could talk to her about anything. She could tell you like no less than 5 ways to get ants out of your kitchen. She could talk to you about politics. She really helped me with my career. She gave me great advice on parenting. She was a great sounding board and a great person to listen to and talk to. And I do really miss that dearly. But it's something that I feel very blessed and very happy that I've gotten that time to get to know her so well as a person on so many different levels. The most amazing thing for me, I think, was the day that my son was born in 2012, and that my gran went from being a gran to a Gigi. And she was so excited about being a Gigi, and she waited with bated breath, and trust me, it was a long wait. It was about 52 hours of labor. She was waiting for me to have that boy, and once he was born, she was just over the moon to have this little grandbaby, this great grandbaby, and she knew what an honor and privilege it was, and so did I. And so nothing was better than seeing her with Alex. And then as Olivia Isabella was born, watching her dote on the two of them, they looked so forward to all their visits with her and with G-Pop, and especially to the treats that they would get, the goldfish, the little bags, the thoughtful things that my grandma used to do. My house is full of blankets that my grandma knitted for Olivia for her baby dolls. There's memories of her everywhere. She's touched our lives in every single way. And I will be sure to pass that on to my children and always remind them of how much love they have from her. Another little tidbit I just wanted to share is that my grandmother was fierce, and she was fiercely protective of all of her kids, her grandkids, and that definitely was not lost on her great-grandkids. And so a few months ago, Alex was having an issue with a bully at school, and I was trying to be super politically correct and teach him, about nonviolent conflict resolution, turning the other cheek and whatnot. And my grandmother looks at me and she says, "Megan, Alex should just snuff the boy. Then he won't bother him anymore." And I laughed because that's such my gran. Like, that's just the way she was. She was tough. She didn't like anyone walking over any of us. She wanted us to be strong, and that's something that she carried with her until the very end of her life, and it's something that I will carry with me as a piece of her. I'm so thankful for everything that she's done for us, and I will never forget her, and I will love her so much till the end of my time.
My dear Granny, my name is Matthew Penman. I am Isa's second oldest grandchild, the son of Stuart and Ruth, brother to Megan. I am married to Kate and have a daughter, Hazel, who's 2, and another daughter on the way. Although my granny's passing was deeply saddening, the emotions that I have mostly been struck by are awe and gratitude. I am thankful to have shared 30 years of life with my granny, and there are many memories that stand out to me. From the many very colorful annual renovations that Granny Project managed on their Palmer Street home, to completing almost every one of Papa's stories before he could even get the words out, to meticulously teaching me her soup recipes, or to watching her play and sing one of her Scottish songs with Hazel. And even since her death, Papa and I have joked about who will continue to be the boss in their relationship. I am so truly grateful for the life that she lived and the time that we had together. Over the last 3 weeks, I have had the opportunity to reflect on the life of my granny and think about what wisdom she would want us to take from the way that she lived her life. She embodied courage, kindness, and a deep love that only comes with 81 years of life, 60 plus years of marriage, 58 years of parenting, 32 years of being a grandparent, and 6 years of being a Gigi. I hope that with time I can embody these traits as well. My granny was the true embodiment of an Iron Lady from the United Kingdom. In her life, Granny made tough choices. She left her family, she moved her young family to a foreign country, and she made what I am sure was a difficult choice to work outside of the home, which she did successfully for over 33 years. She advanced in her career to the point of being responsible for the HR department for Eastern Canada and the Northeast United States for a major grocery store chain. She was literally pushing the glass ceiling before we even knew what that was. Although I do not remember much of her work life, I came to know that same perseverance and determination that made her successful in her career as I watched her battle cancer for a second time when I lived with Granny and Papa in 2005. Through true pain and suffering, my granny refused to complain to me. Although I thankfully don't know what the experience of facing cancer is like, I know that every time my granny was faced with cancer, she approached it with a staunch determination and stubbornness that she would be a survivor. Finally, I am in awe of how my Iron Granny was so effective at communicating her deep love for each and every one of her family members, and how much, even in the later stages of her life, she was aware and in tune with everything we were doing as a family. Though she did not always choose to show it with physical affection, I never doubted her love and support. A week before her death, when I knew her time with us was coming to pass, Hazel and I sat with her. Granny obviously sensed that Hazel was scared of all the medical equipment in the room, and I watched as through obvious pain, she began to play peekaboo with my daughter, to the point of evoking a smile and laughter on both of their faces. And I think this moment captures the type of person that my granny was. Even in the face of hard things, like moving her family across an ocean, or the reality of her nearing death, Granny always put her family first. And that has been evident time and again throughout her life. As I left my granny for the last time, she said, "I love you, Matthew," in her strong Scottish accent. And I wept tears of sadness and despair away, knowing that I wouldn't see her again. Sometimes I still hear her voice in my head, and tears will inevitably well in my eyes. Though these tears are not of sadness. These tears are of a deep felt sense of being loved. And I believe that this is what she would most want us to remember about her. She was brave, strong, and ahead of her time in many ways. And most importantly, my dear Granny loved us all so much more than I ever think I was able to truly appreciate.
Isabella Penman, who was she to me? First she was my boyfriend's mom. Then she was my boss at work, and I worked with her. And then she was my mother-in-law. And in amongst all of those, she was a great friend. Something I loved about her was her laughter, sense of humor, finding everything funny, taking every day at a time, and dealing with everything in her stride. The laughter and the singing and the fun that we had together as mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, doing aerobics and classes when I was just newly married and a new bride, and she was up for anything and up for everything, and dove in with without any apprehension into any of the activities we got into as a pair. That's what I loved about her, maybe her spontaneity and her adventure, similar to how I am in my life. My favorite memory, let's just say there's too many favorite memories. Just all the time we were able to spend together, vacations, her time that she'd come up to camp and take one of our, lots of our staff under her wing and look after them as if they were her own little grandkids. She had a big heart, and she loved ministry, and she loved camp, and she loved kids, and she just loved being a granny to everybody. And she was, in our sense of ministry, she was everyone's granny. When Granny and Papa came up, it was, here's Granny and Papa, and they'd all wait for her. And my favorite memory was she was giving. and there's just too many to even sum up, but she meant a lot to me as a friend and as a mother-in-law, and as an example to my children, and a support for them in each of their own unique ways of how she was able to meet them where they're at. And she's sorrowfully missed, but very much loved. And she's finally at home with her Lord. And that's what we all have to look forward to, those of us who have our faith in him. That's Granny Isa.
To me, Isabella Penman was my grandmother. She was the woman who brought my awesome father, Mark, into this world. Not only was she a grandmother to me, but she also played the role of a mother. You know, if I had a bad day at work or a bad doctor's appointment, or I just wasn't, feeling it, she was the person that I would go to lift my spirits up. You know, she also was a best friend. She was the person who, if I had a day off work, my plan was to go and hang out with her. Whether we were going to Costco, we were going for lunch, or we were just getting up to mischief, she was the person that I would like to spend my day with. What I loved about her, I loved everything about her. She was an amazing woman. But what I can say, I loved the most about her was her positivity. She was such a positive woman. She was my cheerleader through everything, and she just was an amazing supporter. She was always there. She always knew what to say. She was just, very influential, and her faith was just unfailing, and that has made a huge impact in my life, and she has influenced me in so many ways with just having faith and being positive. That was who she is, and that was who she was. One of my favorite memories of her, there is countless. She was around for 28 years of my life, so there's a lot of memories, but I would say in 2013, Granny, Papa, Kesa, and we all went to New York City, and we drove down, so it was a road trip. So road trips with her were always very eventful. Something she would always scream out is, "For the love of the wee man." And none of us know who this wee man is, but that was something she would yell at Papa about. So it was always fun. When we went to New York, we did a bus tour. We went and saw the Lion King. So, that was a really sweet memory for me, because it was something that the four of us did together, and it was a lot of fun. What 20-year-old goes on road trips with their grandparents? Well, I do. So, whether it was going on road trips or them coming up to camp in the summers or spending weeks together. They even Granny used to come with Papa to Montreal to see me when I was at university. Before I went to work, some mornings they would drive up to Milton and have breakfast with me. She just was a very constant person in my life, and she always has been. And I'm very blessed to have had a grandmother like that and have the relationship that I had, because I don't think many people can say that they had that relationship with their grandparents. I'm just so happy that, I had her and that she is where she is now, because she wanted to be with the Lord, and she's whole, and she's in the best place she could be right now. So I love her very much, and I miss her, but I'm just very happy that she is where she is now.
Granny Isa was a constant presence in my life. I like to think of her as one of the main moorings in my life, one of the main pillars that kind of I held on to and I looked to for anything, advice, as a role model. She helped keep me stable as I tackled all of what life had to throw at me. Whenever I felt overwhelmed, I would call her, and she would kind of pull me back together, put life into perspective for me. However, she was never the type to sugarcoat things. Oh no, she would say, "Well, tough. Yeah, you'll be okay. Just keep at it. Try again." Granny was a disciplined and dutiful, mindful, intelligent, industrious, audacious, diligent, headstrong, fearless, and kind, and extremely faithful. She was a woman who definitely knew her own mind. And oh, she loved to have fun and laugh, and sometimes at her own expense. Her wardrobe reflected her vibrant personality. She loved color and rhinestones and glitter, and she was very flamboyant. These are the qualities that were wrapped up into a tough little Scottish woman that my brother and sister called Granny. We loved and still love her earnestly. The memories that we made, I will cherish more than diamonds and gold for the rest of my life. Countless times we would laugh until we were sore, or laugh well after the ordeal was over. But my fondest memory, I would have to say, is when I got the chicken pox. I was a little girl, and I was about 5 or 6. I woke up in the middle of the night in Burlington at their place, and I remember not wanting to wake up my mom and dad because I was just scared. I felt terrible. I didn't think I was going to make it. I was just, oh. And I remember getting up and going into her room and waking her up and saying how terrible I felt. And she knew right away that I had the chicken pox. And she went downstairs, got a hot water bottle, got some medication, gave it to me, and she said, okay, come on, hop up into bed. And I did, crawled into bed with her, and she, at the time I was still like feeling sorry for myself, going, oh, I'm not gonna make it. And she stroked my head until I fell asleep, and it was intimate and very, very special to me. And there was a moment that we shared that, it was just her and I, and I knew that everything was going to be okay and I was going to make it. I'll never forget that. I will miss Granny Isa more than words. But I know that she might be absent from this world, but I know that she's present in the kingdom. And I can't wait to see her again, singing the Glasgow Cat to that wee man. Love you, Gran.
Who was she to me? She was someone who was always there for me when I needed her and always cared for me and made sure I was always okay in all aspects of life. When I was younger, my earliest memories with her was shower time. When we'd come to visit, she would always get me clean right away and made sure I at least had 2 showers a day. And up until her last week, I would come visit her every night usually. And after work, I would take off my boots and come into her apartment, and she could smell my feet one of the nights. And I was sitting beside her bed, and she kept saying over and over again, "You need to have a shower. You can do something about those feet." And I was like, "Gran, I just came from work. They're not always like this. It's just work." And so she kept saying it over and over again. And I like to think that's my first lesson in life from her was always shower, and my last lesson in life was, again, always shower. One thing I loved to do with my gran was always to talk to her and listen to her life. Really was about as learning who she was as a person. It was a lot of fun because you think when you're younger, oh, she's just my grandmother. She makes sure I have food, makes sure I'm clean. But then when you take the time to actually listen to who she was as a person, you learn that she was a strong, smart, independent, dutiful woman who always knew how to show her love, and she was a very loving person to her family, and everybody can feel it. Everybody. My favorite memory with her would have to be all the times that we went on lunch, just her and I, or my grandmother and I, as she would always like to correct my grandmother, or she would always fix that. And she would always visit me at work as well on my lunch break whenever I could. And those were the times where I learned who she was as a person. We would talk just one-on-one and whatever we would want to talk about. So it was always nice to learn who she was as a person and not just as a grandmother or the mother to my father. Thank you very much, Gran, for everything you've taught me, and I love you very much.